sent you guys an email this morning. If you would please pull it up. There's an email that's backup link. Pick one, whichever one works for you. What we're looking at.
I definitely that there the other day.
Oh, is that yours?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. There's a student submission, one of the annotated bib entries. We're going to be looking at that. Here's what I want you to do. Number one, I want you to read it, obviously. Number two, to the best of your ability, pick out ideas, arguments that they make. I'm pretty sure most of the arguments in here are from the article they're looking at, right? That's what the bibs are for. But still, we're not going to have, obviously, the article they're using in front of us, but what this exercise is meant to sort of exemplify is how to actually use the bibs. If you do them properly, and I think this is a pretty detailed bib, I think it's pretty helpful, you can look at your bibs a week or two from now, whenever it is, and actually pull concrete ideas, concrete arguments out of those and use them to try to build the paper. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to attempt anyway. So again, read over it. Should only take a couple minutes. Best of your ability, ideas or arguments that you see. The first paragraph is summary. There's going to be a little bit in there, but the next two paragraphs are have direct quotations in them. So there's almost certainly ideas and arguments in those. Take a couple minutes. We're going to talk about it. Let's talk about it. So again, there's kind of ideas and arguments throughout, but the most concrete ones we get are there in the second half because that's where we have the quoted material, right? I'm not super sold on the second quotation. We can possibly talk about that in a second, but the first one is really good. I feel like I want to hear about what you guys discovered, but I want to start with this quotation because I think it's actually really solid, and I want to make sure we don't miss it. The one I'm talking about, it's there in that second paragraph. I gotta find it. Hold on. Partial, by the way, worst name ever for a critic. Not this person's fault, but partial. That's unfortunate. John's actions suggest that a cultural solution to the new feminine roles requires men to overcome their fears of inadequacy and to ascend new heights themselves. I'm going to kind of jot some of that down on the board. Obviously, I'm not going to write all of it, but partial. We have these new sort of feminine roles coupled with masculine inadequacy. And this sort of supposition that men basically need to do better, get used to it type of thing is what they're saying the film suggests, I think, if I'm reading that correctly. No response. Good. All right. The ideas around this quotation kind of have me curious. I want to ask you guys about this. It may help if you, honestly, if you start at the beginning of the paragraph and you just read everything leading up to this quotation. We're saying a lot. What are we saying here, though? If you just take a minute, reread that section real quick. We say a little bit about McLean, but we say a whole lot about what the film suggests about Holly.
Not so much about her independence, but more about that period.
Well, her ability as a mother, or her I'm trying to find the right word, maybe ability, but yeah, basically we're sort of implying these new feminine roles as embodied by Holly, as exemplified by Holly in the corporate world, sort of result in her failure in the more, I suppose, traditional feminine roles of motherhood and housewife and that stuff, right? But they go on to say, and again, I want to make sure we don't lose all of it, that she needs to be re-educated on how to be a traditional woman. I'm curious about, especially that verb. That's a strong verb. and I want to make sure you guys follow me here. Does anybody know what it means? I know you have an idea what it means to be educated, but to be re-educated, do you know what that actually means? Yeah.
Like retaught, like the simple skills.
Retaught. Well, there's a historical context here. Do you know when someone says someone else is being re-educated? Does anyone know how that usually goes? Or
Not good.
Yeah, like why do you say that?
Because, well, I would say for like all the movies saying for re-educated, sounds like they're gonna torture them or do something real bad to them to make them do right again.
Usually when you get re-educated, it's in a camp, and that camp is in like North Korea or something. Like it's usually, and it's a great verb. It means exactly what it says. Like we're gonna take what you thought you knew or how you thought you saw the world, we're gonna flesh that out, and we're gonna put new information in there. But it has like some real connotations that it's just a very loaded verb. We don't get to talk about words very much in here with all the other stuff we do. I just wanted to let you know that might be strong. Like that's a real, the historical context of that word, that's real strong. Re-education. But
Yeah.
the idea that they're after, and this is what I'm curious about. The film criticizes her parenting skills, and I'm like, maybe. Suggests that Holly needs to be re-educated on how to be a traditional woman. So that implies what about the film? We go on to talk about the patriarchy, McLean learning to respect his wife's independence. What are we claiming here? We're making an argument about what the film is saying about a woman like Holly in the end. Like she starts out hella independent and powerful and all this stuff. But it seems like they're saying in the end, we're critiquing that in some way. What are we saying about it, do you think? In these sentences. When we say she needs to be re-educated on how to be a traditional woman, what are we then saying about the kind of woman she is?
I think it's going into how, like you said about, her, like having a maid to watch her kids and everything.
Yeah.
Her always being busy at work.
Yeah.
Work job and everything.
Yeah.
Well, what about that though? Like, we're using that to claim that the film is somehow critiquing Holly. But what are we, like, how are we doing that? What are we saying? Why does it matter that she has a maid? Let's keep it simple. Why does it matter? According to this argument.
She's not there to take care of her kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, this is back to that idea that it's kind of implied, given how we're reading it in the bid, okay? That if what we're basically, and again, this is the part, I can't tell if this is partial or if this is the student using partial, I'm not sure. But somewhere in here, we're basically saying, to do this, the film claims you can't do the more traditional feminine roles, the maternal, the watching your own damn kids. I mean, to be fair, I can't remember now, actually, in all the stuff we've talked about. Is it Christmas Eve? Like, is it actually like Christmas in this movie? Do they ever say? 'Cause I know it's close.
I know the second one is.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm assuming the first one is as well.
Yeah, they're not super overt. Because like I'm trying to summon. She talks to her kids at one point on the phone, right?
Also, I was gonna say that within the scene where I think her main, I don't know if she's talking about her kids, but before that, the boss is basically announcing everybody that they're off work and everything like
Yeah,
that too.
that would kind of suggest a holiday, I suppose. All right. Well, anyway,
Yeah.
it does. it doesn't look great that she's not there, like with her kids on Christmas Eve, right? Like, according to these traditional narratives that we have.
Right.
So I'm with kind of how we're reading the film to a degree, okay? So on the one hand, we have this critique of Holly that we're saying the film makes. And again, it's not just critiquing Holly, it's critiquing what sort of Holly represents here. This new woman, this modern woman, powerful, successful, all that stuff, independent. Okay. The other half of it is this masculine inadequacy in the face of that. Let's talk about that for a second. Obviously, this is talking about McLean, right? What are we saying? What is Partial trying to get at? They're kind of saying, in the face of this new feminine role, there's this masculine inadequacy. Why do you think that is? How are they arriving at that idea?
What's the old term say? Men have very fragile egos.
I don't know if that's a saying, but I would contend everyone does, to be more honest. But in this regard, like, why would that be?
Well, I think it just comes from years and years of cultural backing that men are supposed to be the dominant in the family.
Well, and supposed to be what?
Hardworking.
Yeah.
Successful.
Well, and like, I feel like Jason, I feel like you did this days ago. Who's probably making more money?
She is.
Why might that make you feel
You're
inadequate?
supposed to be the better provider.
Good.
Provider.
Good. Again, according to these traditional sort of roles, this framework, he would feel inadequate in the face of this new stuff. And I may use a different marker. I had hoped this one would let me save mine. Okay. Let me try this one. This will work. Sorry. Rolling the dice with that. Okay. So what we have at this stage, this is, again, a really loaded, I think, pretty good quotation from a secondary source. What we have to do, what we always have to do in this paper, first and foremost, is talk about the text itself, though. So if we're going to consider bringing Partial in, like into a body paragraph somewhere, we would first actually need a scene, more specifically like a detail or two from a scene that we want to talk about, and we feel like what this person is talking about might be involved, if you follow me.
That's the bathroom scene.
Do what?
That's the bathroom scene.
Which bathroom scene?
The first
The one we
one. The
argued.
only one they're arguing.
Okay, I was like, there's weirdly a lot of bathrooms in this movie, actually. Yeah, I think that's a good one because it's both of these characters who we're talking about, kind of at certain points telling on themselves, right? Like
Yeah.
letting you peek into what they're thinking, how they see the world, all that stuff.
Pretty much.
I'm kind of wondering, what details would we focus on, though? Because there's a lot. You could not talk about the entire scene. There's too much. It's a very good scene. But is there anything we could pinpoint in the scene? Like one or two elements?
She tells her she knows exactly what kind of husband he has.
What his idea of a marriage should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen the movie like way more, so it's not your fault. Do I?
It's just been a long time.
No, it's all good. I've taught this a couple semesters, and yes. Anyway, so Holly, I'm gonna use says up here just for the sake of space, but you'd want to be stronger with that with your verb, right? Like, she doesn't just say it; she kind of slaps him verbally with. and she emphasizes this too, right? She puts some stank on the exactly.
Exactly.
She does. I know exactly what your idea of a marriage should be, something like that. And we talked about that, but let's talk about it here again real quick. According to Holly, and according to what we also kind of know about McLean with what he said before, with the crawling back business, what is his idea of a marriage, how it should be?
Very traditional.
Well, and
Traditional.
yeah, he's the authority figure. He's the figure of power in the relationship. Okay. So it's about masculine power, masculine authority, for sure. Does it matter? I'm honestly asking because we're trying to feel this out on the board. Does it matter that she emphasizes exactly to him? Like, why?
Because she wants to know that she understands what his power wants to be, but she wants him to understand what she's got to do as far as her.
So, and you agree, so
Well, for her own personal well-being,
what do you mean by that?
for her independence, as far as maintaining this job, the main reason why she came out there.
Yeah, okay. Well, all right, so just to make sure, because I don't want to like misquote anybody, what we're kind of saying here is the obvious reading is this, and also the fact that she knows it, right? That's pretty clear. I would say the more interesting reading, just because it's not quite so obvious, I think it's a fair point, is she's kind of implying he's not recognizing hers. Like she's saying, I know exactly, but you don't. Like you're either not seeing it like consciously, or maybe you can't, but like you're not recognizing what it is I want, but I'm already over here fully aware of what you're after. Is that what we're saying? I think you can make that argument. Like again, and we're using it exactly, the fact, like the tone she uses when she says it, implies that he's not. That's great. Okay. So, McLean, and again, I'm just kind of summing it up here. There's different ways to put it, but he's oblivious, perhaps, to Holly's perspective, desires, something like that. Okay. Okay. And she knows it, right? We can't leave that out. Like she indicates that she knows that. Okay. Well, at this stage, again, forget about this for just a second because I just want you to work with this bottom part. What might it mean? Like, why might it matter, or what might it tell us that not only does McLean maybe not see it Holly's way, again, because that's obvious, but what might it mean, or what might it tell us that Holly knows that? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's interesting to me, that she knows both perspectives. She sees both, and she also sees that McLean either doesn't or can't. I'm even kind of curious, and we may not be able to answer that second one, but because that's an important difference, right? That he either doesn't see the difference between the two or he can't. What do you guys think? Let's talk about that one for just a second.
He knows.
You think he does?
I think he knows, I just don't think he can do it because of the man that he is, the type of man that he is.
Is there evidence we can point to that would help us with that? I think there is, by the way. I wouldn't just ask you to be mean.
Well, at the very end, when he gets upset with himself for
Good.
blurting out all that stuff and he's banging his head, he's like, "You're so stupid."
Good.
He
All right.
knows.
So let's.
He just can't bring himself to say it. Darn.
Let me try to make sure this is on camera at least a little bit. Yeah, like. All right. So let's continue it. Sort of over here. After Holly leaves, McLean, I'm going to say, his own idiocy. Again, there's different ways to put that, but he basically calls himself an idiot. He calls himself immature. He even does it, let's be honest, in a pretty immature way. Like, who really hits their head against a wall like that? Like that, I remember when my kids were 3, or 2 or 3, they picked it up from some weirdo at school. When they were upset, they would like, against the floor. We put a stop to that real quick for obvious reasons. But like that's when you do stuff like that, is when you're a child. You know, that's not. So it's
mentally not all there.
for sure, but I don't think that's McLean. I think McLean is, they want us really aware of, not just look at him recognizing it, because again, that's an important moment. It's also important that he won't show her. We're going to talk about that. But it's also how he does it. He could just say, like, he could just go and look into the mirror and go, "You fucking asshole," right? Like, he could do that. But he does the thing, like that. That's weird. That's a weird moment.
Technically, does both.
Huh?
Also, technically, does both.
I can't hear
He
you.
does go to the mirror after he hits his head.
He does. No, but I'm saying, like, we could skip that middle part if we wanted to and still get to the. So it's interesting that he hits his head on the wall, I think 3 times.
I think they're showing that aspect of a kid mentality.
Maybe.
In that-
And because again, he
in
calls
that
himself
part.
immature, right?
Mhm.
Let's have a question about that. What might, and I mean might, what might any of this have to do with maturity? Because that's a weird thing for him to say too. He calls himself immature. Yeah.
I was thinking that because basically McLean and Holly were just fighting like 2 little kids, basically.
I mean, yes and no. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's because, like, after the argument and everything, and what she said, like, he kind of knows it, but he can't, like, bring himself to do it, and it's kind of, like, immature to keep on, like, it's just the way he kind of, like, talks about it, like, he wants it to happen, but
Yeah.
he can't bring himself to do it because of his, I guess.
Why is that immature, do you think?
Cause it's more like, I think it's immature because, I don't know, that's his wife. She's trying to do better for herself. And
Yeah.
stuff like that, and have
Well-
her own independence, but he,
I mean, let's pinpoint what he's commenting upon about himself, okay? I don't know that we could really say he's calling himself immature for everything you just said. Let's think about the conversation they have. He gets real upset real quick, which, you know, might be a marker of immaturity, you know what I mean? But it's also what he gets upset about. And it's this question about their marriage, it's this question about what he wants versus what she wants, right? Initially, we read it as Holly's aware of both perspectives, and she's insinuating, we're arguing, that McLean is not. If he is aware, because it seems like he is actually, well then that's his spot to go, yeah, you're right, or something, right? Like that's his moment to say, sorry, or right?
Yeah, but that's
But he
doesn't.
Well, he doesn't. And again, my question is, can he hear? To me, this part suggests no. Because as soon as you hear the door and he starts hitting his head.
But with how McLean is as a character at that
Yeah.
point in the story,
Yeah.
he internally just cannot admit.
Well, no, he admits it to himself, though.
Yeah, of course, and he admits it
Yeah.
to other guys, and he admits it.
He admits it to Al, but this is after. This isn't even in that space, right? Like, a whole other.
I think he is completely aware that his wife knows, and he's completely aware of his inability to admit that to her.
Yeah. Well, and that's my point is, I think that's the real problem. So here's to backtrack real quick. What we started to say is that this is the issue. She wants one thing, he wants another. He can't even comprehend. She kind of like, we're arguing, she implies here. He can't even comprehend her position on the whole thing, right? It's so antithetical to his worldview. But then as soon as she leaves, it turns out, it seems like, he gets it. At least to some degree. Enough to like call himself an idiot and immature and all this stuff. He does understand. So then that says that maybe that's not the real problem. The real problem is he can't tell her he understands. That's kind of wild. It's in the same ballpark, okay, but it's more specific. And now the question is, and it may have something to do with maturity, it may not. Why can't he tell her? You know? That fixes all of his problems until the people with the guns show up. But like, why? Because I think that's kind of what he's saying in the mirror. Is like, why can't you just fucking say it, right? Yeah.
I was thinking probably because one, I don't know if this is right, but one probably he might be embarrassed to say, and the other thing it might be because it's destroying his masculinity as well.
What is?
Because if he like admits it to himself that she is
Admits
more
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
powerful than
Yeah.
him,
Yeah.
it will destroy his like spirit of making himself look like a leader to her.
Okay. So, I always work hard not to put words in your guys' mouths, but are you kind of saying for him to sort of admit to her or cop to it in some way that she's successful and that's okay or anything like that, like that he gets it, right? For him to do that would require him to basically sort of turn in his traditional man card. Is that kind of what we're...
I would say so, yeah.
Do you guys agree or disagree with that?
I think that's what he's saying.
Huh?
I think that's what he's saying.
Okay. We got to find a better way to say it. We can't say like turn in man card in a topic sentence. But so what we're kind of getting at then is, and here, okay, so this was interesting, and we kind of made this point maybe last week, but we're suggesting that McLean understands the I don't know. He understands the antiquated nature of his masculinity, this traditional masculinity, right? But he's unprepared to give it up. Like he knows it's causing issues and his marriage is like crumbling in front of him, but he can't, it's that same masculinity that's like keeping him from doing that, right? If that makes sense. This might be a topic sentence. At the very least, it's a pretty good place to start. Now here's what we would do at this stage. We've talked about one thing from the scene, we've made an argument about it. We've used it to look at one other element from the scene, and we've made an argument about it. It's helped us arrive at a pretty interesting idea. I'm curious, I'm honestly curious, if we can use this quotation as part of any of that. And I'm going to read the full quotation because it's not on the board. John's actions suggest that a cultural solution to the new feminine roles requires men to overcome their fears of inadequacy and to ascend new heights themselves. That's the quotation. There's this partial person is saying that the film suggests that there's these new feminine roles that lead men to feel inadequate, but to paraphrase, they got to get over that shit.
Really?
Why?
We explained it on the board.
We ended up agreeing with this person, right?
I mean, that pretty much sums up that whole quote.
Yeah, that
In some way.
Well, it's basically this antiquated masculinity, according to this person, leads to feelings of inadequacy in the face of that. But the part we've added is, because of that, he can't admit it, he can't give it up. Because if you admit to inadequacy, you've already lost the man card, right? Like that's part of it too.
Yeah.
You can't admit that you're anxious or you're afraid about your masculinity because that is part of it.
Yeah.
Like that's the catch-22 of it. Does that make sense? I'm honestly asking. Okay, good. So we've modified this a little bit. I'm not going to bother on the board, but that's the addendum we've made to this thought. We're agreeing with it, but we're adding to it. We're building upon it. And that's how we use it here. That'd be a single body paragraph. It would look more coherent than it does on the board. These are just notes, okay? Good rule of thumb, you don't always have to do this, but usually you'll actually start with your evidence because I want to know your ideas. I keep saying you're the Beyonce in this situation. Backup singers tend to not start the song, okay? But yeah, you would talk about this, talk about that, and then you're like, you know what? This partial person kind of agrees, and you talk about their ideas, and you use it to build to your concluding argument in the paragraph, I guess, about inadequacy as a function of, like as a part of masculinity, but also as a hindrance, right? Like it keeps you from. That's outstanding. You guys did that. I mean, I helped hold your hand, but you guys did that. That was great. What time is it, by the way?
It is
11:37.
When do we get out of 12:15? We can do one more. Let's do one more.
Yeah, we got plenty of time.
All right. I don't, and I say this with love, I don't know what to do with that second quotation. Like, I think the student is working really hard to make it work for something. But I also kind of feel like all that quotation does is find a really long-winded way to say that there's corporate stuff everywhere. And I'm like, well, of course there is. They're in a corporate building, right? Like it's
Pretty much.
all I want to say about that is you have permission to doubt what your sources say. You can agree too, but they may make points where you're kind of like, I don't, like that's all right too. I'm just putting that out there.
Right?
What's that?
Completely out of random last night when I was doing my second bib, I found that exact same source and I wrote on it.
No, I think they make some good points. I don't agree with all of it, but
on the same things, on in fact different parts from what they talked about on their
yeah.
bib.
Well, they're talking. I mean, anytime you invoke the American mythos, like you're probably talking about a whole number of things. But yeah, no, it sounds like a really good source. It's just I want to remind you guys, you don't have to just agree with what they say. You can question it. You can poke holes in it sometimes. Like it's all good. But that last point about all the corporate shit, I'm like, yeah, they're in a corporate headquarters. Like you're gonna find corporate stuff there. Like the. Anyway, what is interesting to me, it's in the first paragraph. And it's a small moment, we don't have a quotation, so we're gonna have to just use their paraphrase, but it's interesting. They say, and there's something on this and it's upsetting me. I'm just gonna use this one. They say that these two characters are similar. They share some similarities. They do. They share some pretty stark differences. Okay, but I want to spitball for a second because we don't have the article, so we don't know maybe what this partial person says about it.
I do.
Well, but kind of hold off on that because no one else does. I think we can do the work. Is my point. How are McLean and Hans similar? Because it's an interesting thought exercise. Were you starting to say something? I'm so sorry. I imagine that. I'm sorry again. What do you guys think? How are they similar? Because they obviously dress different, right? Like they get some differences. Yeah, what's up?
I would say their masculinity.
How so? Other than the fact that they're men. Because even that, like in some ways, I would say they're different kinds of guys, right?
Right.
In some ways, are they similar in some respects?
They both have a hard time communicating.
What do you mean?
Well, at least John at the beginning of the film,
Mm-hmm.
he's doesn't open up to a lot of people.
He's not great with conversation. Yeah. What about Hans?
I mean, Hans is just kind of very utilitarian with his speech.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, to be fair, in
He
context.
doesn't even tell. Like he never told his guys like part of his plan was to have the FBI cut the power out.
I mean, does he need to? We want to always appreciate context. In McClane's case, he has people trying to talk to him. None of us are required to talk to anybody, right? But he's not forthcoming, that's fair. In Hans's case, he's not forthcoming, but he's also leading like a heist, you know? Like it's not the time to be chatty, I guess is the point I'm making. Like it's kind, you know? So I get it, but I'm not worried I'm worried if that's fair, I suppose. Jason, use your hand up.
They both get very agitated when they get their way in two different scenarios. Like John's is with his wife, his is with this money. Yeah,
Okay.
He's getting it because that's his goal.
Yeah.
John's got a different goal was with his wife, and his goal is for the money. So they're both agitating the same way, but in different scenarios.
Okay. Yeah, Well, I mean, we can think about that. Yeah. All right, let's start very simply with they are, I suppose, goal-oriented.
Right.
We could put it that way. McClane wants to save his wife, save his marriage to begin with, but then that quickly becomes like a literal thing with the hostage situation. And you're saying, I'm asking, you're saying they react in a similar way to, I guess, not getting that? Like, what do you?
Yeah, so like whenever he bangs us down on the wall, it's
Okay.
in an immature way, and then when John's actually talking to him, when he's got the detonators, and he starts doing all the whistling into the mic,
Yeah.
the reaction on Han's face is like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, well, he gets progressively more pissy as the movie goes. So, well, my detonators, like that whole thing. Like I can't do a German accent. I'm sorry, but yeah, yeah. So you're saying they don't? An addendum to that would be they're goal oriented and they're not goal oriented to a fault. I don't know, because I mean, yeah, Hans is willing to kill people to get what he wants. In a way, I guess you could argue McClane is willing to do the same thing because he murders a whole bunch of people. Although here again, you would defend McClane with they have a bunch of hostages and he's killing back. You know, so it's. But sure, they're kind of willing to go that next mile, I suppose. Is your hand up, Nicholas?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. How else are they similar? I mean, again, this is interesting.
I'd almost say they both kind of, like, they both have a false confidence about them.
Okay. How so?
Well, I mean, Hans definitely more.
He's pretty confident. I'll give you that. Why do you feel like it's like? I'm interested in this false qualifier. Like, what do you mean by that?
I mean, like when I read a lot of sources and I look at a lot of people and I get a lot of the same sort of things that like Hans in a way almost can't believe he's getting away with this.
He's pretty pumped about it. But that to me would be like legitimate confidence. You know what I'm saying? Like why do you feel like it's false? I'm not disagreeing. I'm just curious.
When you say that someone can't believe they are getting away with something, there's innately like a form of like there was some form of doubt in there.
Yeah, or like disbelief that it's going so well. Yeah, I mean to a degree. Well, that's not false confidence to me though. That's self-doubt. That's kind of the opposite. Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if you can say that John is confident, but it kind of has to be.
I don't know. I mean, we see McClane doubt himself for sure. Like, again, I think of the bathroom scene with the feet and the apology. But, I mean, according to what you've given us, they both express doubts, I suppose.
It's kind of given, it's not really specific.
Well, they're quick moments, though. So there is something to be said for only showing doubt, like in small moments, and you mostly keep that to yourself, I suppose. Right? I'm interested in
Where
this.
did the source go into?
Well, let's think about this. Let's think about this. For the sake of time, let's think about this. Because I'm trying to, anytime we begin to make a claim, which is what this is, and we don't have the article in front of us, but I'm trying to think of scenes where they might line up in some kind of a way,
Well,
right?
Here's an example, right? With Holly, remember Hans says when he first sees her, like, who put you in charge?
Yeah, no, I was. That's one of the ones I was thinking of. See, that's interesting. Like, and she says something really smart. She's like, "You did when you killed my boss," I think,
Yeah.
or something like that. Why does he say it like that? Could you argue? What's he implying?
A woman to be in charge of the situation. It's almost like
You could. I mean, because we're just operating off of what the scene gives us. Holly walks in, and that's his opener.
He doesn't even look at her when he first says it.
I think he's still, this is right after he has that conversation with John on the radio, so I think he's still miffed about that.
He's still
So
pissed.
He's got a smart ass comment to say to her.
That's fair
And
context.
Her response to her back to him shocks him as in, oh, what?
Yeah. Well, and that again, I think helps us a little bit with he doesn't expect Holly to be in charge, but more to the point, be capable of being in charge. Is that fair? Like, because yeah, he's surprised by her sort of ability when it comes, like, she gives him very direct sort of not just things that they need, but why. She's like, unless you want to mess out there, people need to go to the bathroom, like things like this.
Which I think that's one of the reasons why they show her name on the door when she gets ready to walk out. Because it's got her actual position and it's got her name on the door.
Yeah. Well,
And showing that the power that she possessed in that scene, and there it is right there on the door.
yeah, but it's also her different name, which is interesting, right? But to keep it to kind of what we're talking about here, so we're kind of saying, well, is that similar to McClane in any way? This like looking at Holly and saying that she's like not capable of what she's doing, or being surprised sort of at her position, at her power, The best thing I can think of is, again, one of those scenes early in the movie. Either, well, I mean, this is great. The Argyle moment, right? In other words, you thought she would, something would happen, she would fail, she'd come crawling back to you. Like that part where he owns that. Isn't that him?
Yeah.
Aligning with Hans there? Who put you in charge? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, now here's what's interesting about that. Okay, so how do we sum that up? They're discrediting Holly's ability, I guess, would be a way to talk about it. Hans definitely does that, and I think we can pretty ably argue that when McClane agrees with Argyle, he kind of does that too. What I'm curious about, just because, I mean, again, I'm thinking about like some of the arguments they make here, and again, I don't know how much of these are the student, how much of these are the article. I fundamentally disagree with a pretty important point, and this is my question. Hans, I think, stays this way throughout the film. For instance, the very last scene with Hans anyway, because he dies at the end of the scene. We talked about Holly for a moment. I want to refresh our memories. What's different about Holly in this scene?
She shows vulnerability.
How?
Because her blouses over.
Yeah, like she's made to look.
I don't know. I feel like any person who has a gun pointed to their head is vulnerable.
No, for sure. But again, it's accentuated. Like again, the point I always make is this is not necessary, right? But at some point in Hans's activity, like Hans has made this happen. To be clear, what I'm not saying is Hans goes, "Gah!" Like that never happens. That's a different movie. But
Yeah, it's not necessary.
but him throwing her
also,
around, him treating her like he does, this is happening.
Also, you're in a building where you're one floor below a bunch of floors that just exploded,
Which Hans did.
which Hans did.
Right? I'm saying, like, his actions have done this. Like, this is what. So Hans makes Holly sort of appear to be, I suppose. Now, the point I think I'm trying to make here is the first scene we referenced, that's super early in the movie. It's like a half hour in or something. This is at the end. This is the end of the movie. This is the climax. And she is completely sort of taken all of her power away via her appearance, all this stuff. She does have a gun to her head. You don't have a lot of power in that moment. Like,
Original cowboy scene.
exactly.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's that narrative.
He follows him out, he even makes him give him his plan. Why did you blow up the top floor? Well, when you steal $600.
Yeah.
You can't do that, when you steal $600 million,
Yeah.
you have to think you're dead.
Yeah. Well, he tells him, like, he's using these narratives, Hans is, to make his escape. Like, he knows what people will assume, right?
And Hans' discrediting of Holly's ability, I mean, it almost kind of is what accentuates his downfall. I mean, he doesn't expect
His
her
literal
to-
downfall.
He does not expect her to knock the gun away from him.
Well, now this is what's interesting to me.
Because he just doesn't expect a woman to do that.
So again, he's consistent, if we're talking about it like this, the whole movie.
Yeah.
He stays that way.
But John isn't.
That's what's in, and that's the point that, like, I
And
mean,
that's the point what the paper actually gets into, the whole source, Is
okay.
it-
Well, the way it's written about here, it doesn't sound like it is weird, but
is it goes into the idea that Hans, in a way, accentuates the negative sides of John's personality. And that by the end of the film, those are parts of himself that John hasn't been able to get away from.
okay.
Inadvertently, defeating Hans, in a sense, could almost be a metaphor for him defeating his
Traditional masculine,
traditional
whatever it is.
masculinity.
Yeah, maybe. Well, let's talk about that real quick. The moment we're talking about in the scene is McClane yelling Holly's name. Like, that's it. But we have to contextualize this properly, right? This is all a plan. Like, McClane goes in, he has the gun on his back, like he's thought about how this is gonna go. So that would mean, and please disagree with me if you like, but like the way I read that is he expects Holly to know what to do when he says her name, right? I mean, he expects her to do something with the. I guess we can't know specifically, but he expects her to get with the plan as soon as he says her name, because if not, he's gonna get blown away. Like, that's how that's gonna work. He can't drop both of these guys without some help. Like that it's not gonna happen. That to me suggests, as you were saying, that he's not doing this anymore, right? He's kind of recognizing her ability in the moment. Like he recognizes that she could be a partner. Well, then that says, number one, that he has kind of, maybe changed his outlook here in regards to her ability. But to return to an earlier point we made, it's not just that. What does he verbally do to Holly here? What does he tell her without saying it explicitly? That he couldn't tell her before.
I go for it, I trust in you.
Yeah. Again, he couldn't say this when they were fighting before, right? He couldn't do it. But this, I think, does that. Now, of course, you have to consider this is a moment of crisis. Is this born out of necessity? Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. If it were a calmer exchange, would he have been able to? We don't know, like, because we don't get that, right? But, and yeah, that is what kills Hans. He doesn't expect Holly to be capable. He doesn't expect her not just to duck, but to hit him and do all that. He doesn't consider her a threat. She looks like she's not a threat, right? According to the traditional narrative. Cool. So what are we saying here? Well, we have a couple options, actually. We have two distinct options I can think of. Number one, I keep coming back to this question of appearance. Like Holly, in this scene, no other scene really is it like this, but in this scene, very late in the movie, so maybe there's like one other, she looks like this. She looks like she doesn't have power. She looks like she doesn't have ability, right? And I think, and this is honestly like a theory of mine, because I cannot go back to a place before I saw the movie, because I think I was probably 6 when I first saw it or something. I think you as an audience member, you're meant to read her as a damsel. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think you're meant to get tricked too. I'm asking, though, because I'm not sure, because I can't go to that place. But you don't expect Holly to do anything, right? Like, you just kind of expect her to get saved. Am I wrong in that?
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's 2021. That kind of suggests we still have this story kicking around. Like, we still assume.
Yeah, of course we do. It's a part of human culture.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
Well, but the wild thing is, this movie's trying to update that, right? And this movie is, well, according to you guys, old.
The nation is old. This is classic.
I mean, our country's not that old. But no, but my point is, we still have this kicking around so much that we can't see it coming. We get tricked just like Hans does, right?
Right.
We get fooled just like he does. And the wildest part of all of that is, Hans, in his little speech right before he dies, is calling out McClane for being an adherent to the cowboy narrative, right? He's like, it's not going to go that way. This isn't a story, right? He's saying all these things, but he's living the cowboy story. Like, that he is doing it. He has the damsel, he has the gun. He even makes the classic bad guy mistake of, I'm going to tell you my plan. I'm not going to just shut my mouth and shoot you.
Oh, yeah.
He stops his partner from killing him, right? Totally different movie. If when McClane drops the gun, other guys just like, da, 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 and that's just like fade to black, sad movie, sorry. Like, it's, but he does the whole, he claims he's not living the narrative, and then he does it. And again, you could argue, that gets him killed. Like, his inability to realize his own, what?
You make a case for that when he misquotes Roy Rogers or whatever it is.
Oh yeah, he doesn't. He doesn't get. Gary Cooper, you asshole, is what.
That's John Wayne, Gary Cooper.
Yeah, he knows the narrative, but not as well as he thinks he does.
And they show it in that part of the scene.
That's true. That's true. Okay, 2 things just happened. All right, follow me here.
Okay.
This is a separate argument from what we just did. This is a different body paragraph, probably. This one is about, and this isn't the full argument, but this is the theme, Hans's sort of wait, that's not right. His overconfidence. When it comes to navigating narratives, right? Because again, that's his whole plan is dependent upon what the FBI will do, but also how everyone will interpret his actions. They will readily assume he's a terrorist because he's taken over a corporate building. They will readily assume he's died in an explosion because that's what fucking happens to terrorists and that just happens. Like, oh, they must have screwed something up and died. Good, and that's it. Like and I don't know that he's wrong about most of that. Actually, it's a really good plan, to be honest. But he's not totally right. He gets one thing wrong, and that is the final narrative, the cowboy narrative. It's not going to go like that. He's right that it doesn't go like that because, again, in the traditional narrative, Holly would not play a role.
But it doesn't go like that for him.
He's right about it being different. He's wrong about the way that it's different, right? And he's wrong about Holly's ability. Again, we're coming back to that. But the other point I would make here, and this is a separate, body paragraph. Obviously, we're talking about Holly's ability. We're talking about how we judge that or how we know it. To me, again, there's a couple ways this could go, but most of this, I think, seems centered around her appearance in this scene. In earlier scenes, she does look powerful, she does look successful, she's even got the watch and her, it's all... Huh?
I mean, if we're going by this whole cowboy narrative thing, and that's inadvertently, Hans is also, now that he's been introduced to the idea that this whole thing is sort of a cowboy narrative, you realize that the bad guy doesn't get away in most of those films.
Well, but he says it's not like that, right? Like, he says it's going to be different. And he's right, but again, what ruins him is he doesn't realize the real difference. He thinks it's different because the bad guy's going to win. That's what he's saying. But he's wrong, because of course, that's the real difference, is that there is no damsel, basically. But you can make the argument that he gets fooled, one, by his mindset, right? But two, this is reinforced by her costume. She looks the part. I don't think that's unintentional. Somebody at some point was like, wait, lose a button. Perfect. Like that happened. That happened. So now we're just talking about appearances. Again, if Hans or somebody like him walked into this room dressed as he's dressed, what would you assume about him? Immediately.
He's affluent.
Yeah, and in charge of something. I would be nervous. Like, this is fucking, he probably signs my checks or something. What do you want? Like, immediately I'd be like, all right, are you here to observe? Like, is that what we're doing? Like, some nonsense like that?
Like a principal on the first day of school.
We would just assume. If a guy shows up in a suit, you just kind of assume, right? Because he looks the part. Same thing, if a guy dressed like McClane walks in, what are you going to assume? That he needs help?
Yeah,
He's wandered in off the street?
Yeah.
Well, apart from the blood, but like just wearing the tank top and the slacks and perhaps even the no shoes, you're like, this is probably a homeless person or something. Like, it's, what are you doing here? Like,
that scene, Die Hard with a Vengeance.
Yeah. But again, you automatically assume many things, but in this case, we're talking about power and ability, what someone is capable of. She looks the part according to the narrative that he claims is not happening, but he really is. He's saying the narrative is here, but I've changed the ending. And it's like, actually, you missed something important. So he thinks he's above the narrative. He's not. He's not. I think that's our argument. Now that may lead to this one in like a subsequent paragraph, but it's basically right? Like that's kind of what we're saying. Like his big insult to McClane earlier in the movie is you grew up with too many cowboy movies. You think this is one of those. You like because you've been sort of polluted with that stuff. He's the same way. Just because he's from Europe doesn't like they got movies over there. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not. He's got the same thing kicking around his head. That's what gets him killed. That's why he loses. He thinks he's above it. He's not. Does that make sense? Awesome. So what did we do today? We don't have time to develop this, by the way. To be totally honest with you, I think part of me just wanted to write that on the board. But
Well, we took
Somebody
one
said-
source and we pulled multiple paragraph ideas from it
by going to scenes,
by going to
Right.
scenes.
we use it as a jumping off point.
That's evidence.
Huh?
So that's just evidence of that.
No, it is. But oh, you saying this?
Well, yeah, that portion of how he mistakenly says, Gary Cooper, or.
Yeah. No, I think it kind of enabled us to work backward.
Yeah.
Again, these are all notes, right? We're just trying to figure it out. But yes, what you wouldn't want to do, because you'd run the risk if you do too much, is like flooding a paragraph with too much evidence. You're not going to end up talking about anything if you have way too much evidence in a single paragraph. So you have to limit yourself. But yeah, I like to recap what we've done. Number one, there's multiple ways to use these sources. I would imagine you go to a source with some ideas. That's excellent. You gotta, to the best of your ability, allow those sources to change or be modified, because that can happen, okay? But also, I want to remind you, you can just disagree with somebody. You can agree with some things the source says, disagree with others, or think that they're missing something. Like, any and all of that is on your table. That is allowed, okay? But what I'm telling you is, if you honestly engage with these sources, whatever they are, that will occur. And then all of a sudden, you can sit down and go, well, what scenes do I need to think about to agree or disagree or whatever with this source I'm considering? What detail should I maybe pull for evidence? And then just start talking about those details. You can leave your secondary source behind for a moment. Actually start talking about the text. And then once you've done that, you can go, well, do I want to actually use the source? Do I want to pull in a quotation? You can. And again, agree, disagree with it, whatever, but use it to make your argument. That's how you build a paper. I'll tell you this, I never know more what I think about a thing until I encounter something I disagree with. Straight up. If I read something like in an article, or let's be real, on the internet I disagree with, immediately my argument is crystalline in my head of like, oh, this is what I think, right? I think we all do that.
Or what I do sometimes with like a stupid argument, when it comes to politics, I just scroll down and see, okay, who the hell actually wrote this, and see what their political opinion is to see if I just plain out disagree with them.
Well, counter to that, to get more on topic, I would say, again, you can agree with some elements of what somebody says, right? It's
Right.
very rarely completely agree or completely disagree. These articles are the same way. I think that first quotation is excellent.
Yeah.
Some of the things around it, I'm kind of like, I don't know if I buy that, and then the second quotation, I'm just kind of like, why is that even a thing in this article? But all that's fine, right? You're allowed to do that. I worry sometimes you guys don't realize that. These people aren't perfect. They don't know everything. You might know better. That's cool. All right. To end class, because I know we're almost there. I realize how to say all of this without like in a cogent way. I realize not everyone is up to date, because again, that's how the end of the semester goes. My advice to you would be this. Wherever you're at, if you haven't written a proposal yet, first of all, do that for two reasons. One, I think it's just going to help you. It's going to help you. Force yourself to sit down and kind of say, here's what I think, and like actually try to develop it on a page. It will help you, okay? Even if it's trash, it's better than nothing. It's a start, okay? Do that. But secondly, I'm going to leave feedback on those. I'm trying to finish grading your second papers. I'm going to be done with that here in a couple days. But then I'm going right to your proposals. I'm going to start leaving you feedback, my thoughts. So it's also maybe worth doing for that reason. After that, jump into some bibs. I've had a couple people email, not a lot, but I've had a couple people email me struggling. I forgot to mention Die Hard as a title can make research a little more difficult. We have that phrase in our culture, like something is Die Hard, like you're a Die Hard fan or whatever. So that can make your results a little terrible. You got to think about your search strings, okay? Die Hard and film, Die Hard and masculinity, Die Hard and cowboys or action
I
movies.
just put Die Hard movie.
So, but yeah, you gotta help the search engine a little bit. Because if you just type in Die Hard, you're gonna get a whole bunch of like weirdness. You could also potentially try putting Die Hard in quotation marks, because that's gonna tell the search engine you want that as a phrase. But even that, again, because we have that as a phrase in our culture, so probably the and something else is gonna be the best route. The other thing I want to remind you of, for this paper, because of the text we're using, you are allowed to use popular sources. You don't have to, but you can. I sent and also posted to CourseDen an example of what I consider to be like a pretty decent popular source. Is by a guy named Brehan. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's like 2 or 3 pages. It's not long. He curses a little bit, like it's kind of fun. But the point in me giving that to you is that there are useful popular sources. They're only useful when they make arguments. He makes arguments about the film, okay? What you don't want to use is like a BuzzFeed list, 10 times I watched Die Hard and went, oh, like that's not useful. That's trash. Don't use that, please, okay? But if they're making the kinds of arguments we make in this class, and again, agree, disagree with them, whatever, but they're making arguments that have actual ideas that require proof, that's probably worth your time. That's something you can use, whether it's popular or scholarly, okay? But that's what you got to be looking for. I just want to, I always get BuzzFeed articles for this paper. I'm like, why are you doing this to me? Please don't do that. Anything else? Oh, you had 2 bibs due today. Obviously, if you need a little more time on those, you can have it. You have 2 bibs due next time. Again, I think this is the point in the cycle where wherever you're at, you can get caught up, more or less. We're going to really start writing the paper next week. I think it would benefit everyone to just get all this stuff under your belt. Does anybody have any questions for me? Okay. I'll see you next week, maybe. I know Halloween is on Sunday. I don't know what attendance is going to be like. Be very careful if you go and do any of the things I would have done at your age that we can't talk about. And even if you don't, just be careful, because those people are out there. Real talk. If you don't have to drive anywhere on Sunday night, don't. I'm being deadly serious. There you go. That's a thing to do. All right. Thank you, guys.